Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Justice Insights podcast. Hi, my name is Maria Angela Mina, and I'm the founder of the platform. And this is where I conduct advocacy to educate, alter harmful mindsets, and create social change. On today's episode, we are discussing gender disinformation and online gender based violence. To help us understand this topic is my guest, Lilly Quin. Hi, Lilly.
Hi, Maria. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So, Lilly is a South African media researcher and social activist. Her research examines media representation, online discourse, and the lived experiences of marginalized identities. Beyond academia, she has co founded and led grassroots initiatives focused on community empowerment, centering ethical and equitable social change. She's passionate about decolonial thought and digital storytelling. She brings a fresh perspective on the intersections of identity, media, and activism. Whether dissecting media discourse or pushing for social impact, she's all about amplifying voices that deserve to be heard. And so, why are we talking about gender disinformation? To begin with, the Economist Intelligence Unit reports that 85% of women globally have personally experienced online gender based violence. And in Africa, we have a 90% prevalence rate. And the same study shows that misinformation and defamation are the most prevalent tactic to conduct online gender based violence. And so Kenya and South Africa are some of the countries with the highest rates of gender disinformation and online gender based violence. So, on today's episode, we're going to focus on how AI has been increasingly used to create false news, images, and videos that harm women, individuals that do not conform to gender, and marginalized groups such as the LGBTQIA individuals. So, are you ready to learn more? Let's get started. So, Lilly, what is gender disinformation and how is it different from general disinformation?
So, this is such a critical conversation, I think, and very apt to be having during International Women's Month and National Human Rights Month in South Africa. Um, just firstly, to say that I'm so interested in this conversation because I'm really excited to learn about how digital dynamics impact lived realities in both our respective countries. Because so often the big issues that affect us all are shared by mainstream media with a Western centric lens. And it's really important to amplify the nuances of how they play out in the different contexts, such as here on the African continent. So, firstly, disinformation refers to false information shared to deliberately mislead, deceive, or manipulate. And it's most commonly used to undermine the target, be it organizations, governments, public figures, through coordinated spreading of falsehoods with the intentional aim of reducing trust or causing harm. Now, this differs from misinformation, which is simply put false or incorrect information. And although it's equally harmful in how it practically plays out, misinformation is conveyed generally without the knowledge of the information being intentionally false or serving an ulterior agenda. So a lot of people fall prey to misinformation as a result of disinformation. Gender disinformation is where it takes a different turn. It's a form of gender based abuse that seeks to spread, as with disinformation, false and misleading narratives in relation to the target's marginal gender identity, most often. So this specifically targets women, gender diverse individuals, and members of the LGBTQ community. And its primary function is to intentionally harm the target of abuse, generally by discrediting, undermining, or inciting harassment, with the aim of deterring them from participating in the public sphere. And gender disinformation usually relies on things like sexist tropes or fabricated sexual scandals or narratives that seek to question competence or morality. Um, and I'm sure you have examples of how it plays out in Kenya, but in South Africa, it's most commonly experienced by journalists, activists, political figures. There was a 2023 report by the South African Human Rights Council that estimates that 70% of women respondents in the fields of politics, law, and the media indicated they'd been subjected to online abuse or harassment, which is a significant number. The same study showed that over 90% of respondents had seen other women or gender diverse individuals face abuse online. And obviously, one thing I do want to note is that this is just one single study and it has a limited scope. But given how blurry the lines remain around digital abuse and reporting in general, the experiences are far likely to be higher. And I myself have experienced this when commenting on posts. Um, Interestingly, one that really irked me was being called a silly little girl. Um, and it was a microaggression of sorts, but one that really made me interested in having this conversation with you because it made me feel a sense of shame when in reality the term girl should not hold any negative connotation, but due to the patriarchal society that we live in, it made me feel that my argument was not logical, showing that even I myself have internalized these narratives and this rhetoric that is shared online.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. I mean, personally, I have faced a form of gender disinformation to discredit my thoughts, especially because I advocate against femicide. And so it's very difficult to see these things, especially in terms of the public sphere. In Kenya, we have 24.8% of elected women in parliament. However, this is really a really small number because a lot of women face gender disinformation attacks online, videos and memes posted about their character in order to hinder them from participating. Speaking of social media, I wanted to know, how do you think it fuels the spread of gender disinformation?
Social media fuels the spread of disinformation because of how widely it is used and how people have come to accept it as a credible source. When they will see something made, a claim made by something that looks like it has stature or is related or cites a study, even if it's misinformed or it is citing a study out of context, people will take that as fact and truth. And in South Africa, we have 26 million active social media users, and people are more likely to share something if it has an emotional trigger to them. And that is one of the core tenets of disinformation, is that it is designed to trigger an emotional response, such as fear, anger, or moral outrage. And when we have high engagement on posts, that's what we call algorithmic amplification. So when something does incite us to impulsively respond, that can then fuel the spread of disinformation because we are very quick to comment, tweet, share, and then that amplifies the post and amplifies that narrative, regardless of people have been able to go back and fact check it, which
Yeah,
obviously takes a lot of time as well.
exactly. And why do you think people fall for gender disinformation on social media?
I think honestly, it's because we have become so used to sort of allowing our own views to influence what we feel and what we think. And it's really hard when something that speaks to a belief you hold, and for others it could be seen as a bias or a prejudice, when that is reinforced by a statement online. And so you'll see something, it will ring true, it'll resonate, and you would share it. But also because when something looks legitimate, it is very unlikely that you would doubt that. And what's really scary with the rise of AI and deepfakes and all of these technological manipulations that are happening, people are not well equipped to find ways to debunk that or to find if it is um, untrue. I mean, to go and thing is everything. There can be a big number thrown out at you or a big statistic, but when you look at it relatively, it may not actually mean what you think it does. But how many people are going and searching for the like initial source? Even we see this in the media where things are thrown out of whack. So I think it's it's so effective because it plays on inherent biases within our cultures and within our societies.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, if we think about the toxic manosphere which exists, I mean, in your country and in my country, Kenya, we do have like a very rate of social media users, especially on Twitter in Kenya. And from that, we see people holding the belief, of course, anti-feminist belief, anti-queer beliefs. And once you have that personal belief and you find someone that actually amplifies it, then you tend to stick with them. So we also seen the Andrew Tate effect, when people follow Andrew Tate because they already know like this guy doesn't like women, I kind of don't like women, so let's just be friends. You become like some form of radical in that sense. And absolutely, I agree with you. And I would wonder also, what is online gender-based violence? Because when people talk badly about a certain gender or a certain type of group of marginalized people, um, this translates to some form of harassment online. So, what is online gender-based violence?
So, online gender-based violence, or OGBV, is refers to technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and this is the use of social media and technology to cause harm to women, girls, gender-diverse individuals, and the LGBTQ community. Um, and I think this is something that is quite common for most people who work in the media, but also according to Amnesty International, just like the offline world, um, power dynamics impact how people engage with each other online. And this is something I found within my own research with a marginalized group in South Africa, was that the online dynamics played into how they felt offline and vice versa, in terms of feeling safe, in terms of feeling comfortable, in terms of feeling like they had power. So the types of online gender-based violence, the form that it takes is one of the primary forms, and probably most scary, is doxing, which releases personal information or identifying details without the consent of the individual. We had a case in South Africa where a journalist was doxxed by a political figure, and she received rape threats, death threats, and it led to physical stalking. It's threats of violence, video and image-based abuse, online harassment and cyberbullying, outing of a person's sexual orientation, which particularly in this landscape, not only actually in Africa but across the world at the moment, is very, very dangerous for individuals. Hateful and abusive speech, digital blackmail, and targeted surveillance. Um, One of the problems is that the definitions and types of online gender-based violence keep evolving with the evolution of technology. Technology is moving at a rate that we can barely keep up with. Every single day there's a new development, every single day there's a new platform. And so it's very hard to curb and legislate against online gender-based violence. It's also one of the issues is that from opposers of this concept that online gender-based violence is real, it is often undermined as not being a serious threat. And so it can be taken quite lightly that that was just a comment, didn't mean anything, and it won't spill out into reality, which, as we know, is untrue.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we see this in Kenya as well, where, of course, there's anti-women agendas that are spread online, especially against politicians, but also against private individuals. And I think we know, at least in the Kenyan community, we know someone who has received online gender-based violence because of gender disinformation, and also someone who's been stalked online. And so even the data from the Gender Violence Recovery Center shows that up to 47% of Kenyan female internet users have experienced these forms of online gender-based violence. And at some point, we have to worry, what does this mean for our society, but also what does this mean for democracy? And so, in line with this train of thought, how do you think gender disinformation does hinder democracy and participation in public discourse?
I think one of the issues with online gender-based violence and gender disinformation is that it results in women self-censoring more than they already do, which we know is a threat. In a physical environment, women will often self-censor, appease because of a physical threat. But when it spills into the online sphere, the harassment can be exponentially amplified because of the anonymity of who can perform the harassment and who can um, share this gendered disinformation and who then has control of the narrative. It is much harder to control or counter attacks. And I think that this then discourages or um, invites women to remove themselves for fear of their own safety. And in line with that, um, according to last year, we had our national elections, and it was found that women candidates face 3 times more um, online harassment and abuse than their men counterparts.
Mhm.
And I think that this then would deter people from participating publicly, speaking out, and ultimately then that reduces the number of diverse voices that we have, which is essential to democracy. We need multiple perspectives. We need people from marginalized groups to be able to advocate for their realities and for the realities of other marginalized voices. And without those, we don't have a democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also democracy is the participation of each member of society, be it a woman, be it a queer person, a non-gender conforming person, whatever the case may be, I think that is what democracy is. And also the right to freedom of violence, freedom of speech, public participation. And in Kenya, particularly, we see how gender disinformation hinders women's participation in politics, especially. Um, because in 2022 we had a lady called Tulia Pio and she was running for county assembly. And she said after these experiences, she told UN Women that politics is a man's game because she was severely harassed on Facebook, her family and people were using pseudonym accounts just to troll her. And so it's really sad because what next does this mean for our society? And because individuals are really faced with this problem, I'd like to ask you what can we do as individuals to combat gender disinformation and online gender-based violence?
So there's a number of things we can do, but I think what I would just also like to add to what you had said about democracy is that I think it genuinely does stand to um, serve. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about our socialized norms. So when women do step back and do stop participating, we further entrench these ideas that the political landscape should be a male dominated field. And that really plays into this ease and spread of gender disinformation because we're reinforcing these social biases. So women, gender non-conforming people, queer people, anyone who stands to challenge the status quo has to put themselves in a risky position to stand up for democracy. They're in a catch-22, either put themselves at risk and harm and potentially those of their family or close personal relations, or remove themselves entirely. And I think it is incredibly brave how many people are putting themselves in those positions, but also why it's so critical that we have better legislation and better understanding of this topic, which is why I think a conversation like this is really important, particularly to see how even though we're in different countries, we're facing the same issues.
Yeah.
Um, but to go back to your question on what advice I would give women and marginalized groups facing online harassment and disinformation. Um, I think if you are already facing that, digital security is really important, and there are lots of resources that you can access quite easily about using two-factor authentication, private settings, content moderation, and tools to protect your online presence. Limit your personal information where possible. Uh, Again, it is unfortunate that the onus falls on the woman or individual being attacked to protect themselves, but there are ways in which we can do this. Also, lean on the legal frameworks that do exist. So in South Africa, we had the Cybercrimes Act of 2020, and there is new legislation that is being developed around online harassment and gendered abuse that is in the works. However, as with the reporting of these instances in the physical context, the way in which they're implemented or employed or even actions taken is lacking significantly. But there are other support groups. You can report in South Africa to the South African Human Rights Commission, or there is legal aid centres that can help you with bringing your case and taking it further and getting further protections. I would also say having support networks. Um, One of the really difficult things to face is when you feel alone and like this is just happening to you. So I think having support networks and finding avenues to protect your emotional and mental well-being without feeling like it is invalid is really important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think placing the onus on the individual is such hard work because when someone is a victim, of course, the first instance is to victim blame. And I think that's very hard, to be honest, because it's never your fault. And I think your point on especially mental health resources, I really support that. And so seeking mental health information, seeking a support system, but also remembering to report the posts and report these accounts beforehand. It may not happen to you, especially, but if it happens to someone close to you, is you will feel it because if it happens to the person next to you, then you're the next victim. Am I right?
Yes, and unfortunately,
Absolutely.
it comes down to that terrible thing of you have to act in the moment and collect evidence. And that is one
Yeah.
of the really scary things with online
Yeah.
abuse is that it can just be deleted
Hmm.
and it can be taken down and it can be up for a few seconds, but it can spread so fast. But the person who initially shared it can remove it and not
Yeah.
necessarily always be found or face the consequences. Um,
Hmm.
and this is where it becomes murky territory with uh, disinformation and misinformation in terms of the initial malign actor and who was spreading that, and then who has just gone on to spread it. But unfortunately, when it comes to this, keeping evidence of what was said is also quite key and quite crucial, despite how immensely difficult it is in the moment.
Yeah. I think the internet has made everything extremely difficult because it gives people the confidence, and not always the right people, the confidence to share negative information. But it also makes things very difficult to report, evidence difficult to keep and, transmit, and also difficult to even prosecute these crimes. So thank you so much, Lily, for your invaluable insights on this critical issue. To our listeners, I hope this discussion has shed light on the complex challenges of gender disinformation and online gender based violence in Kenya and beyond. And so today, I would like you to remember that you are not alone. Facing online harassment or disinformation is a very difficult thing. And so reach out to specialized support networks or organizations that combat these specific issues. Do you need any resources? I'll be sure to compile them. And thank you for tuning in to Social Justice Insights Kenya. And one more round of applause for my guest, Lily. And awesome. Thank you. And so for more content on social justice issues, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Spotify. Together, we can work towards a safer and more equitable digital world for all. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.